preparation for this webinar has identified ways that we can be more clear in our guidance. We will be updating CEDAR's guidance. We'll be updating our withdrawing guidance. I just want to say we're all learning and we all want to do the right thing. We are very grateful to the district leaders that are here today, who we get to hear from, Franklin Pierce, Yakima, who have really pioneered and been at the forefront of testing new approaches around withdrawing students or not withdrawing students. And they're still learning too, as you will hear. So thank you for being in this space where we're all learning together to do right by our students and communities. If you take one thing away from today, we want you to know that OSPI does not require districts to withdraw students for either apportionment purposes or CEDAR's reporting. Just to reiterate a couple of things that Tony said, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A function. As I said, we have a lot of content planned for today. It is unlikely that we're going to have an open question and answer session, but we are committing to collecting your questions and developing additional guidance if need be and following up with you on those. We also may have some folks joining on YouTube Live who will not have access to the Q&A function. So we ask that you email Jenna here today at jenna.millett@k12.wa.us. And we are going to introduce ourselves, our lovely panelists. Shelby, can you start us off?
Yeah, for sure. I'm Shelby Lockhart. I'm the Executive Director of Student Achievement in the Yakima School District, and I'm just really excited to be here and tell a little bit of Yakima's story and the journey that we have embarked on. So thanks for having me.
Angela, you're muted.
Thank you, Lisa. Yes. Angela Jestrom from Yakima School District. I'm the Student Information Systems Supervisor, and I'll talk through a little bit of how we did things in our SIS. Very excited to be here and join everyone.
Hello, everybody. My name is Erica Bravo. I'm the Attendance Intervention Specialist for Franklin Pierce School District, and I'm super excited to be sharing today.
Good morning. I'm Lisa Ireland from the Student Information Department here at OSPI. I'm the CEDAR's data manager and very happy to be on board with these great folks this morning.
Good morning. I'm Becky McLean, and I'm the enrollment reporting manager here at OSPI for P223 and P223H reporting.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jenna Millett, and I'm an Attendance and Re-Engagement Program Specialist with OSPI.
And I'm Chrissy Johnson, the Assistant Director of Attendance and Engagement here at OSPI in the Student Engagement and Support Division. Really pleased to be here. Thank you all. And with that, we will jump into our presentation.
So I'm going to go over what we will discuss today. We are going to talk about why is this issue important. We will review the state requirements, truancy, apportionment, and CEDARs. We will go over the data side of managing enrollment and reporting, as well as systems to do outreach and re-engagement. As we begin, I would like to ground ourselves in the OSPI vision, mission, and values. Our vision statement is all students prepared for post-secondary pathways, careers, and civic engagement. And our mission is to transform K-12 education to a system that is centered on closing opportunity gaps and is characterized by high expectations for all students and educators. We achieve this by developing equity-based policies and supports that empower educators, families, and communities. Our values are ensuring equity, collaboration, and service, achieving excellence through continuous improvement, and focus on the whole child. Particularly relevant to all of our work in education, but especially when we think about attendance and re-engagement. Equity is at the center of this work. And what we mean by that is that It requires equity goes beyond equality. It requires education leaders to examine the ways current policies and practices result in desperate outcomes for our students of color, students living in poverty, students receiving special education and English learner services, students who identify as LGBTQ+, and highly mobile student population. This requires education leaders to develop an understanding of historical context, engage students, families, and community representatives as partners in decision-making, and actively dismantle systemic barriers, replacing them with policies and practices that ensure all students have access to the instruction and support they need to succeed in our schools. I would like to acknowledge the Indigenous people who have stewarded this land since time immemorial and who still inhabit the area today, the Step Chase Band of Indigenous people of the Squaxin Island tribe. And we ask participants to honor their lands in the chat as well. I want to share with you our why around attendance. These are the OSPI guiding principles. So first, attendance is foundational to student learning. It is a stepping stone towards engagement and mastery. Absences tell us when a student has not accessed or had the opportunity to engage in instruction. Absences can reflect inequalities that are caused by or perpetuated by our systems. Absences can signal when a student or family might need more support. Absences are a signal to get curious about why students aren't attending. And finally, students and families are our best partners to understand the barriers to attendance and how to increase attendance and engagement. And I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Christy.
Thank you, Jenna. We just wanted to spend a few minutes highlighting why this topic is so important to us. First, as you all witnessed during the pandemic, we really saw that it highlighted a disengagement crisis. A few data points that I can share with you. The first was a report done by Bellwether that showed there was an estimate of 3 million students nationwide that were unaccounted for during the pandemic. That is, we expected them to be in our public education system, and they no longer were. We couldn't locate them or have information about them. And then at one point during the pandemic, this was from a Seattle Times article, there was an estimate of 29,000 students that were disconnected from their education. And folks, you know that the impacts of the pandemic are not over. And what we see based on our regular attendance rates from last year and our 9th graders on track, that we think that there will be even more students or continue to be students that are at risk of disengaging based on these research-based early warning indicators. This data is from OSPI report card, and last year we saw a drop in our regular attendance rates from 82% in the previous year to 67%. And our 9th graders on track also remains low. So 30% of our freshmen are not on track to graduate. Next slide. So we have a gap. A common practice in our state has been to involuntarily withdraw students without a confirmation that they're enrolled elsewhere. This is not what happens in some other states. And so we're really trying to understand the issue and figure out what we can do about it, because it results in a huge gap in our social safety net. We wanted to share with you some of the benefits of keeping students enrolled. What we hear from districts is that keeping them enrolled maintains communication between the district and the students and the family. It can reduce barriers to re-engagement. It can keep students front and center for educators and adults in our system. It kind of avoids the out of sight, out of mind trap. And if students are re-enrolled or they start attending again, districts get funding for them. We know that there's some good reasons or valid reasons that are driving districts to withdraw students. So one is that they can't claim them for funding. Another is that districts might think that the state requires it, either for CEDARS or apportionment. We know that our data systems are set up in a way that it makes it the easiest option to meet these reporting requirements. Districts might not want their absences reported to OSPI. And then another reason is that keeping students enrolled can inflate classroom numbers and impact overload pay. So we are going to, in this next section, Becky, Lisa, and I, we're going to talk about what are the state requirements around our different program areas. So we'll start off with the compulsory attendance laws. First of all, parents and guardians, as well as children, have a legal responsibility to enroll in education and attend. In our state, students that are ages 8 through 18 are required to enroll and attend in a public school, private school, or receive and be registered to receive home-based instruction. There are some minor exceptions that are all detailed in the RCW linked here. There are also specific requirements in the law for districts to respond when students are absent without an excuse. The first one is that parents must be notified every time a student has an unexcused absence. The school must schedule a conference with the student and the parent to identify the barriers to attendance and make a plan. The school must administer an assessment to identify barriers and provide data-based interventions based on that assessment. The district at a certain point must file a truancy petition, and refer the student or parent to a community engagement board. All of these interventions must be attempted prior to withdrawing a student or filing a petition, with the exception of the community engagement board. We will put 2 links in the chat that are to 2 guidance documents that summarize these required steps for elementary schools and secondary schools. In addition, OSPI has authority over Chapter 392401 WAC, which defines an absence. And in that WAC, there are requirements for outreach and interventions. And specifically, the language says a district must have a process for outreach and re-engagement for students who have been withdrawn due to non-attendance. And there is no evidence that the student is enrolled elsewhere. Lastly, your district might have additional requirements. You might have policies and procedures for addressing excessive excused absences or other requirements. So please make sure that you know what your district policy is and that you are engaged in following them. These slides are in the chat if you need to go back and look at some of these, and we are putting links to the guidance documents that are referenced. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Becky McLean to talk about our state requirements around apportionment.
Thank you, Chrissy. So for apportionment, one of the factors that are used to generate your funding is the student count and who's been able to be claimed. But the apportionment rules do not state that you're required to withdraw students who can't be claimed for funding. So next slide. So the monthly count is a specific time in the month that your districts are claiming or counting their students. And it's always the 4th school day of September and the 1st school day for the months October through June. Next slide. And so for basic ed funding, that is based on the count that's received on the P223. And for the P223, an eligible student is one who, number one, is enrolled in your district on the count date and who has attended within 20 consecutive school days prior to the count date. And then for September, they have to attend on or before the 4th school day of September, which is the September count day. Next slide. There is one exception allowed to this 20-day rule, which states that when a student is expected to be absent temporarily, an agreement is put in place immediately afterwards, or before, just immediately afterwards, between the district and the parent, that the student will continue his educational progress while temporarily absent. And because it's temporary, the student has to return to school by the end of the school year. Then the district can claim the student for up to 2 counts. But if the student doesn't return by the end of the school year, whatever was claimed for those 2 months has to be removed. Next slide. So that was for basic ed funding in the P223. With P223H, which is the form that you're counting your students for special ed funding, there a student can be claimed if, number one, again, they're enrolled in the district on the count date, they have the IEP and evaluation in place on the count date, and they receive services on or before the count date, but in the prior month. And keep in mind that with the P223H and special ed funding, it's not about 20 consecutive school days. It's about, so that doesn't really apply to the P223H count. It's that the student receives services on or before the count date, but in the prior month, which typically probably is 20 days, but just keep that in mind. Next slide. And a note on special ed, districts is not even, the district is not automatically relieved of special ed in section 504 obligation, even if the student can't be claimed for funding and is still enrolled. Districts are still obligated to provide free and appropriate public education for students that are not enrolled in their district, and maintaining student enrollment for students with IEPs is important because for the family and the IEP team should continue to be working to identify reasons behind the prolonged absences and schools' refusals. So in short, unenrolling a student breeds conflict and potentially calls the FAPE obligations into question for the district.
Thank you, Becky. And Becky, I did see one question in the Q&A just to clarify, when the absences for apportionment include excused and unexcused absences.
Correct. Thank you, Chrissy. Yes, it's if the student has been absent any part of the day, or excuse me, if the student has not been to school, either unexcused or excused, is considered a day that to be tracked for the 20 consecutive school days.
Thank you. And I also saw a question about FAPE. FAPE is free and appropriate public education. And Lisa, would love to hand it over to you to talk through our CEDARS requirements.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody. So we're going to speak to the requirements and the guidance for reporting to CEDARS. So again, as we mentioned earlier, CEDARS guidance does not instruct districts that they are required or direct them to withdraw students from enrollment. It just provides, again, guidance as to what the options are. So next slide. So which students are we talking about when we're talking about withdrawing them or unenrolling, whatever term you wish to use? That would be students that would be called an unknown student. No information is had as to why the student is absent. You're not receiving communication from the student or the family, and they may still be present in your district. Again, there's no communication. Another version of an unknown student is there's no communication from the student or family. It appears the family may no longer be in residence in your district, and that can be determined by return mail, home visits, other methods that your districts and schools use to do outreach to students. The family of the student, the parent or family, parent or guardian of the student, is indicated they are transferring, meaning they're moving out of your district. Could be to another district in Washington, out of state, but you don't yet have confirmation of enrollment anywhere else. That's our unconfirmed transfers. And then we have what we would call a summer no-show. It's students that were enrolled through the end of the prior school year that do not present themselves for enrollment at the beginning of the new year, and there's not been any communication from the families as to the whereabouts of their student. Next slide. So when to report students as withdrawn to Cedars? So districts have authority to determine the minimum enrollment thresholds. That would be district policy or practice, meaning how long to keep the students enrolled. We recommend that districts keep students enrolled for a minimum of 20 consecutive full days of unexcused absences prior to withdrawing them for non-attendance. And we recommend that you do not withdraw students that are absent from school for known reasons. We know why they're not present for education. They're still enrolled students. Next slide. So reporting absences to Cedars. If a district does not report a student to Cedars as withdrawn, you are not submitting a school withdrawal code and district and school exit dates. They're still considered enrolled for Cedars purposes, and you must continue to submit absences to OSPI while that enrollment is maintained. So if a district does report a student to Cedars as withdrawn, again, you're submitting a school withdrawal code and district and school exit dates. You quit submitting absences as of the date of the withdrawal, and those students are required to be included in your Cedars submissions through the remainder of the reporting school year. So then we talk about students who do not attend at the beginning of the year. Again, those are, the students who were enrolled through the end of the last year, but they do not attend at the beginning of the next school year, and again, without communication from the families. Districts have the option of reporting the students as withdrawn in the prior school year, or you can keep them enrolled in the new school year and if appropriate later on exit the student. And our Cedars guidance does provide this information. We have looked at the guidance and see some opportunities to enhance that. That will be done in a later version of the guidance. So over the summer, we'll update that. So programs and attributes for students who do not attend at the beginning of the school year. So if your district chooses to submit students as enrolled who are not participating at the beginning of the school year, please remember to do not submit program or attribute records for these students, such as special education records, learning assistance program title, and basically carrying over attributes or programs from the prior school year. It's very important to not do that because we don't want them included in reports or data draws when they're not receiving those services. If a student does return and begin participating and they are determined to be eligible for these services, you would just begin serving them and provide a start date when that occurs. So when we look at a window of time, and again, this is just some thoughts on how to maybe manage these students. Keeping students enrolled beyond the first few days of school allows for more reasonable time for districts that determine they wish to keep them enrolled to attempt to locate and re-engage these students. So one thing to think about is if a district is going to keep non-attending students enrolled, you may want to look at that September 30th date is when you want to exit that student. And there's a few reasons for that. There's some downstream impacts of keeping them enrolled past that date. So reporting a student who's not attending as enrolled, again, these are students that haven't been participating since the beginning of the school year after September 30th, has some potential impacts. The regular attendance report that's included on report card and with SIF. Students must be enrolled for consecutive 90 calendar days in your district to be included. That includes those students who've been absent, excused or unexcused. And remember, if you're continuing enrollment for these students in the new school year who've not attended, you're submitting unexcused absences every single day that they're out. For assessment counts, If a student is submitted as enrolled and you maintain that enrollment, even though they're not participating, October 1 on, students may be included in the assessment counts if they're considered continuously enrolled. That's October 1 through the assessment window without a greater than 30-day calendar break, exiting and re-entering. So that number, that student would be included in that denominator and shown as a non-participant. Free and reduced meals counts, that eligibility count that we use for so many different areas, report card, high poverty, and other reporting measures or eligibility measures. So those students submitted enrolled on or after October 1 would be included in those numbers in the denominators. October enrollment for report card. CTE, certain CTE Perkins measures look to courses taken across years, and if measures are being calculated in that school year, the students would be included in those denominators. And a side note, and this isn't the September 30th or October 1 enrollment, students whose enrollment you decide to maintain into the new school year, if they are enrolled as a first-time ninth grader in Washington in that year in which they're not participating, we are setting their adjusted cohort group. And your district will be accountable for those students. And it's a fairly small population, but it's something to think about, that your district will be held accountable for those students if they don't return to enrollment or are never reported as confirmed transfer out. So where do you find the OSPI guidance? On attendance and truancy, and then I'll turn this back over. The main webpage, these links will work within that PowerPoint. I believe that's been shared in the chat. On the main webpage, their policies, guidance, and data reporting. Becky's apportionment information is on the enrollment reporting guidance and CEDAR's data manual and the CEDAR's reporting guidance.
Thank you so much, Lisa. One of the things I just want to say, again, like I shared at the beginning, we've had an opportunity to look at our guidance and to get more clear. And so what you will hear us do is try to make a distinction between must and should. And when we say must, then that is backed by a legal requirement, administrative code requirement, or in CEDAR's guidance. So just know, there are some things that are within local control, and we've tried to make a distinction between what is required and what is a district decision. So as you take this information back to your district and your team, we want to talk about how do you know when to withdraw a student. And I'll hand it over to Shelby in just a second here, but just want to be clear that there are those elements that are required, and that there are some local control issues at play here as well. So with that, Shelby, and that these decisions shouldn't be made without your team. So with that, I'll hand it over to Shelby to speak a little bit more about district policy.
Yeah, thanks, Chrissy. So when we got into this work during COVID, we realized we needed to look at our policies and understand what is must and should as well at a district level. And so we're really in this work right now. We have not answered all of these questions, but I did want to put these questions out there as some of the questions that we're asking. You know, is this a policy or is it a practice that we've had in place for years? And also, what are the impacts to those different policies and practices? We're having conversations about who has the authority to make these decisions around practices and policies. And it's really helping us get clarity on the musts and the shoulds and the best practices around this. So we're in it now. We don't have all the answers for sure, but we're doing this work now. And next slide. And then, of course, in Yakima, we ask ourselves always who should be at the table when we're doing this type of work and coming to clarity on answers to these types of questions. So these are some of the people that we want to make sure at the table when we are updating policies and practices in our districts around withdrawing students. And I will speak more about a little bit later about some of the deeper work of establishing why this work is so important. But for now, these are some of the questions and the people who are starting to be more involved in this process. Next slide. Okay, I think it's back to you, Chrissy.
Thanks, Shelby. Before we dig in and get to hear from Yakima and Franklin Pierce in just a second, we wanted to frame what we understand to be a couple, the enrollment status options that you would consider as you're grappling with this topic. So if you could ignore the gray boxes and just focus on the three at the top, you will hear our districts talk about these three options. So one is keeping a student enrolled and in their class schedule. Another is to keep the student enrolled, but move them to a non-credit bearing course. Another one is to withdraw the student. And then we've included, what does that mean for absences, CEDARs, apportionment? You can see we have an empty box there we need to fill in. This will be something that we will be incorporating into our updates to guidance. Next. And for all of those options, they all still require efforts to conduct outreach and re-engagement. Before I hand it over, I wanted to quickly cover some of the things that I've learned from you all around what are some effective outreach and re-engagement strategies. Folks innovated and tried new things during the pandemic, and these are some of the things that we heard. The communication that we just talked about between school staff, registrar, and district attendance and truancy lead, among others, is critical. So ensuring that you've got the right folks at the table. Assigning staff to conduct outreach is also essential. Defining what the minimum effort in outreach looks like. Is it 4 attempts in multiple modes of communication? Having that standard is really helpful. Having a communication system set up, and what we mean by that is, are parents getting notified in advance of the policy and procedure before they get withdrawn? Or do they get withdrawn and then they find out what the policy and procedure is? And then this is a big one. We've heard over and over again that emergency contacts are incredibly helpful. Often they know things about the family and the student that are pivotal to helping us find them. And with that, I'm so pleased to be able to hand it over to Erica Bravo from Franklin Pierce, who will be talking about their Welcome Back course. Erica, take it away.
Hello, everybody. Okay, Welcome Back course. So our district created the Welcome Back course back in COVID. And since then, we have made some changes and some modifications for the new guidance from OSPI, and we'll continue to make those changes. All right, so what to do when a student has 20 consecutive days of non-attendance. These are the processes that we've put in place for our school district. So first, students will be withdrawn from the current active schedule for 20 consecutive days of non-attendance. That's excused or not excused. In order to track these students for the purposes of re-engagement, they will be enrolled in a Welcome Back course in Skyward and Canvas. Sorry, there's somebody talking over me. I'm at a school and I apologize. I'm doing all of this. I'm gonna wait till they're done. Okay, I will restart for the enrollment portion. In order to track these students for the purpose of re-engagement, they will be enrolled in the Welcome Back course in Skyward and Canvas at 0 enrollment. So for this, we created a specific code description, which we will review in another slide. So Canvas course, each school will assign a designee to the Welcome Back Canvas course for the purpose of tracking and re-engagement efforts. The follow portion is my favorite part. Attempt to re-engage the student in school. Families will receive attendance conference invites, publications, information, school and district info. So anything that is put out as information, our families are getting that. They're still being invited to attendance conferences. I'm involved, I'm able to communicate with our families. So that's the best part of adding them in this process. And then tracking. Elementary schools have a Canvas course for K through 5th grade. And then our secondary schools have a designated Canvas course information page with point of contact. All right, next. All right, welcome back course on Canvas. Okay, so this creates a welcoming place for our students to reconnect with schools, encouraging messages, contact information, etc. So here we have set up a system to regularly review our rosters, work to re-engage our students through the MTSS team or similar processes. So if your school district does not have a Canvas course set up for them, the Welcome Back course is still an amazing process and support for your caseload in Skyward. So having this Canvas page, just thinking about it just recently, I had a student who we had agreed regarding her attendance. If she was absent, she needed to be accountable, and she messaged me out just by having the Canvas course. So she's not just communicating with the school, she was communicating with me. She was so cute. She was like, Ms. Bravo, I'm out sick. I can show you my mouth. It looks really bad. I don't feel good. I'm like, no, I don't need any pictures, but I'm so glad you're communicating with me. So this is not just for the school, this is for everybody to be able to communicate with each other. All right, next page. Okay, benefits of the Welcome Back course. This allows our students to be out of our count for funding purposes and still allows us to have ways to monitor our students for the purposes of re-engagement. We don't want these students to fall through the cracks. It provides a class for the students to see when they log in, but have already been dropped from their regular classes. Just a recent benefit of having the Welcome Back course. We had a community engagement board meeting just recently with a student who had hit the 20-day non-attendance. And their parents were concerned, oh, we had to do all the new re-enrollment process. No, because they were in this course, it didn't even take 15 minutes. They were able to set up a schedule and set it up, and right away, like we gave the teachers 24 hours for him to be able to start, and he started that Monday. The CEB was on Thursday, so 24 hours that Monday, they're already back. So it took right away. These are just the small benefits of having the Welcome Back course. All right, next one. So let me get a drink of water because I'm really thirsty. All right, breakdown for steps for Skyward. So we drop students from the class in current active schedule. Withdraw the student using the status code, withdraw code U4, then re-enroll the student using the entry code RU4. Then we update the percent enrollment to 0%, verifying the student status is active. That's how they're able to get all of that cool information from us. Add students to the reentry course in Skyward. This will automatically add them to the Welcome Back course. So just having these steps and these breakdowns for Skyward, this also builds us like a roster showing us who we have to like communicate with, how we can get a hold of these kiddos. So one thing is that I know we use the code withdraw, but we actually don't withdraw any student. We put them in the Welcome Back course unless that family has notified us, yes, they moved to a different district, we moved to a different state. So yes, we do those things, but only if we know and have confirmed that they have moved somewhere else. All right, and then the next page is just showing you guys what our Canvas page looks like. So this one's my favorite. So this is one of our high school. This is Gates High School. Dr. Olson created a video, which is super awesome. He's telling our kiddos what they're gonna find in this page, what resources we have with them, and it's just super encouraging. And the best part about his like webpage is that it shows all those different languages. So any student in English can get all that information, and Dr. Olson translated everything in Spanish. And so you see all the different flags on there. Our families can click on there and they can see all of those alternative schools, any information from our community that an English-speaking student will get, they also get that. So just on that page is sticking to encouragement and supportive language and not really looking at the law of attendance, but just trying to re-engage our families. And then the next one would be our Keithley Middle School. And so theirs is a little bit different, right? They didn't do a video, but it's still point of contact, information. Who do you contact? How do we get you involved and re-engaged? And right there, they can email someone, they can email the school. So there's so many positive things just by having Canvas. I mean, you guys may have something very different, but it's really neat because every school looks very different. All of our middle schools, our secondary schools, everybody looks different. Our elementary schools is just one page that our families go to, because it's a little bit different. The kids aren't really getting involved, but for our secondary schools, they are. And so I believe that's it. My next little slide is just giving you guys my contact information. Again, I just want to say what a privilege it has been to be able to represent Franklin Pierce School District in all of our efforts and everything we're doing. I may not be able to answer all your questions here today, but that's my information. Thank you, everybody.
Oh, Erica, you are getting so much love right now. And your district piloted this during the pandemic. And I was just sitting here, I'm like, I'm so glad that we finally get to hear from you. Thank you. Thank you so much for your leadership on this. And so with that, I'm really excited to hand it over to Shelby and Angela in Yakima to talk about their journey around this process.
Thanks, Chrissy. Okay, so we got into this work during COVID primarily. It really shined a light on the need to ask a few really critical questions over and over and over, and we are still doing that. We're asking these questions constantly right now. So in the middle of the pandemic and today, we are asking who is missing, why might they be missing, and where do we go to get information to answer these two questions. So we recognized that we were missing some information about students, and I'll speak a lot about the data systems that we needed to have in place and the information sharing that had to happen during COVID and even now that we're working on. So when we ask those three questions, and when we currently ask it in our citywide network improvement community, in our attendance meetings, and our PBIS meetings, it really helps us stay centered on the why we're doing this work. And it helps us really understand whether or not we have quality access to information on students, and if not only our school district, but our community does. Because they really want to help us in this effort to re-engage students when they disengage or when they're involuntarily withdrawn. Although I will say during the pandemic, we did put a pause on withdrawals, and it really informed our efforts now and has called on us to really get clear about why we do and do not withdraw students. So I'll speak a little bit about establishing the why at a city level and at a district-wide level that we're still establishing. I want to keep repeating that Yakima is early in this work, and we're just excited to share some of the early steps we're taking. So we wanted to make sure that we could tell the story of the impact if we did nothing. If we didn't change our practices, if we didn't change policies, what would happen? And so we hired a company, Bellwether, to do a financial analysis with us to determine what it might look like if we didn't change things. So what we ended up finding out is that we spend a lot of money over on the left in the gray there at K-12, responding to disruptive events in students' lives, and those usually impact attendance. The key disruptive events that we studied were the ones that had the highest impact on attendance. And then we learned some things about where we put funding over on the right in the yellow there towards adults after they leave our school system, and how much money is spent on adults who were in our public school system to manage the disruptive events in their lives. So drug and alcohol support, teen pregnancy, mental health, those kinds of things. So long story short is that we learned that we had about $587 million that we could potentially reinvest if we integrated services, if we focused on preventative early warning systems and data systems, primarily driven around attendance first as kind of the early warning. but we could reinvest that money in our community to do prevention versus reactive care for the adults in our community that we had kind of missed opportunities to support them early. So that was a really big aha for us, and a really great way for us to really establish the why we would want to relook at withdrawing students. We noticed that the students that we were withdrawing often ended up in care in our city, and we were paying in our city for services that we probably could have prevented had we intervened early and integrated services a little better. Next slide. So we're, like I said, we're still in the conversations. We're early in the game here. We're learning a lot, and we're really talking a lot about our leadership and being transparent and really getting the data out in front of everybody and really democratizing data and making sure that we are being really clear about the decisions that we're making and asking a lot of questions. And we're really working hard to limit withdrawals and re-engage students where possible. Next slide. I'll just share some of the big three that we have learned so far is that this work really takes effective leadership. And that means at a regional, a city, a district level. We all know a school district cannot do this work on their own. So we really, really need our city leaders to own this and be in it with us. We learned that it's critical, especially with our informal leaders in our community, that we center our dialogue around asset-based communication and reporting. And then we have learned that it really takes a lot of information sharing and establishing really good data systems to do this work well. Okay, next slide. So the data perspective from Yakima really has helped us figure out how to keep students in the system and while meeting the reporting requirements. So I'm gonna stop talking. I could talk on and on about the why and how this work has been going, but we really want to make sure you know how we've done some of this, some of the technical stuff and some of the how. So Angela is here to share that part of the story.
Thank you, Shelby. Yes, so go ahead and advance to the next slide. So from a Skyward perspective, we first needed to figure out how do we identify the students. And so in our software, I've listed out the tools that we were regularly using, the 20 consecutive absence report, absence occurrence reports. We use the custom attendance letters. We schedule those, so those are looking for students who are meeting those thresholds within the prior 30 days. We also have a custom form. We call it the BSET form. It's a behavior and academic form where we allow actually anyone, teachers, to be able to document interventions on, behavior information, academic information, and then of course staff observation if we had students who were non-attending. Next slide. So we established tracking codes in the software. So how did we keep track? So once these students were identified as non-engaged, can you go ahead? Yes, we created in Skyward 2 new entry and withdraw codes. And back to one of the comments that Erica mentioned earlier is we're not actually withdrawing students, but in the software, we track it in our entry withdraw system. We do what's called a status change. And that allows us to track specific codes on students. So when we did have students who were non-engaged, we would do what we call a status change in the system using a code of STN. So that helped us identify that this student was non-engaged. And along with that, we would change their percent enrolled to identify that they were 0% enrolled, which helped us find again those students who needed to be eliminated from the P223, P223H, bilingual, and all those other counts. If the student was not engaged, yes, we did change that percent enrolled to 0. So then after interventions and re-engaging the students, we would then perform another status change in the software. We used a code we created called STR for re-engaged. Again, that helped us keep track of during this time period, the student was non-engaged. We claimed them at 0% enrolled. Once the interventions, and we do have success stories here, getting students back into school, we then performed another status change in the software using the re-engagement code. In addition, we code the interventions that we've done with students in the special programs area under the other Washington programs. That's where we would track interventions such as home visits, whether guardian contacts were made, referrals to the community engagement board, and so on. And again, as Shelby's alluded to earlier, we're still in this process of how we can perfect all of these pieces. Next slide. So ultimately, kind of from a system perspective, my mind is always thinking about what tools can we use in the software to help make sure we're accurately claiming students. So from our district perspective, when we run the bilingual counts, we use the district P223 report. And when a student who is bilingual has a 0% enrolled, they come up on that report as an exclusion. So right away, they can see that that student should not be counted in the bilingual counts because they hadn't participated within the prior 20 days. In addition, it got a little bit more complicated when you're talking about potentially needing to reduce claiming for CTE funds, because when a student is active in the software and has a full schedule in their regular classes, then you're potentially claiming funds in the CTE area. So we needed to come up with a way to make sure the CTE department was informed. And so you can see a little snippet on the screen of a data mining report that I built that identifies the student, the course, and actually the teacher name, so that the CTE department would pull this report out of each school and determine if there is a student that is in a vocational class that they should not be counted because they're at a 0% enrolled. And so if you see column F on that little snippet there, I'm pulling in the percent enrolled, and that's what some of the ranges look to. And then on to the next screen, this is where I've given you also a little snippet of a data mining report that I use to collect information for the P223H, because the P223H special education report looks to just enrollment, not necessarily FTE. So if you have an active student that's still in the special ed counts, you need to make sure they're eliminated from the various areas. So working with our office manager actually of the special ed department, I built a data mining report collecting information such as their grade level, their age, their disability, their LRE code, and then of course percent enrolled of 0. This helps the special ed department know who needs to be reduced from the P223H. So that one got a little bit more complicated, but I kind of wanted to share with you the data elements we used to be able to eliminate these students, because that is a potential ramification of keeping students active in the software. Okay, next screen. So some of the lessons that we've learned through this process, some of the barriers, obviously when you're looking at attendance data in the software, if attendance is not entered accurately, it makes it difficult to pull information out of the software. So that was one of the things that had come to light, is that, sometimes when people stop coming, teachers stop taking attendance on them. And we know that that's a critical factor with keeping students active, is they need to take attendance. And so that then generated more conversation. And with Shelby's guidance in our district, we established a district-wide, I would say almost mandated, communication to at each school level, which teachers were not taking attendance, and that communication would go back to the teacher and to administration. And even for a period of time, Shelby was tracking that as well, just to make sure that everything's improving in this process. And so what we call that in Skyward is the automated unrecorded class attendance. So that was set up at every entity to generate every day. And obviously, if you have one of the gotchas kind of for teachers is if they were out and they had a substitute that day, they come up on this automated recorded attendance. And that kind of was a little concerning for them. But I mean, we know you were gone. You couldn't have taken attendance that day. So it, doesn't mean anything negative. It just, that's the way the software is designed. And so what did we learn? Obviously, for me, one of the biggest pieces that the outreach is critical in re-engaging students. And with these interventions, we did get students back into school. So we could actually see from a data perspective the amount of time kids were out and then when we got them back. And so again, just another positive reason for not actually withdrawing them from the software. When you do withdraw them, we use a lot of third-party products. And so when they're withdrawn, they then lose access to either, as Erica mentioned earlier, Canvas. We use Canvas as well. They lose access to, we have Google Suites, so they couldn't get into their Google accounts and so on. So lots of trickle-down effects for inactivating students. And so what is our practice now? We also are requiring that attendance be documented with the interventions prior to withdrawing students for unexcused absences. I think Shelby was going to touch a little bit more on that process, but we ask our district staff members now to say, before you withdraw a student, this needs to be done. And so next slide, I think I'm switching it back to Shelby.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. Yeah, it's been so great partnering with Angela in this work. She's an amazing leader in this work, especially on the technical side. I have the good fortune of being out in the field, working with small groups and other leaders and just leading with my heart and my head. And then I get to turn to Angela and say, Angela, with your heart and head and your amazing technical savviness, how do we make this work? So she's just amazing. Thank you, Angela. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what Angela is talking about. It's just some of the guidance we sent out to our staff around what needs to be in place before you withdraw. So go ahead and hit the next slide there. So here were some of the bullet points that went out to our registrars, our principals, anybody involved with attendance. Really what we called out in these bullets is like what Angela said, you must intervene and document before we withdraw. So we need to have evidence that we did everything we could. We gathered information, we found out things. And as you all know, in the process of doing that, a lot of times we end up not withdrawing students. So we are really in this work right now, trying to make sure that folks know where to go to document, how to intervene, and things like that. So these were the key things that we messaged out. Go ahead and head to the next slide. So we invested in quite a bit in the last couple of years. So kudos to our cabinet, our superintendents, our school board, our city, in putting funding, people, resources towards this effort. So one of the biggest moves we made was getting a MTSS data system that's really user-friendly and field-friendly. We've had some data systems in the past that are pretty techy and hard for a teacher to access. So now we have a system that called EduClimber that allows everybody to get in there and really understand who's missing and start asking why they might be missing. We integrated PBIS with attendance, and that's in the early phases. So we're working with all departments to integrate these two worlds together. And running Big Five protocols, the who, the what, the when, the where in our data system has been really powerful. We set up weekly automations of an early warning, whole child early warning data goes out to all leaders and to tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 teams. And that has been really powerful. During COVID, that was really, really powerful to have really quick live early warnings out to teams. so they could go set up home visits and find kiddos. We've established quite a few MOUs with city leaders, with agencies to allow them some level of access to our attendance data so that they too, if they're an organization like Communities in Schools who is helping us with home visits and finding kids, they have access to that live data that updates every night at midnight. Okay. And we've done a lot of work in the last 4 years in partnership with AWSP, a good colleague, Janine Butler, our district directors and superintendents around building data literate leaders. There's a big investment in that in our district to really know how to access data, how to comprehend it, how to facilitate dialogue around it and take action quickly. So we're trying to up the efficiency and the capacity there. We've invested in Parent Square and parent notifications, and we're really working all the time to up the level of usage by our families and community. And then we've invested in a social emotional behavior screener. As of this year, Yakima School District is screening every kindergartner through 12th grade. Second grade through 12th grade can do their self-screening, and then teachers from K to 12 can screen students after 6 weeks in the fall. So we have this really wonderful universal screening data now in Yakima that helps us and has really helped with internalizing behavior that we don't always catch in the office or on our attendance chart. And then leadership around whole child data meetings. We've got a lot of principals, directors, everyone's on board to de-silo our efforts. So that's been really powerful in Yakima. Okay, next slide. And then our next challenges, our next steps, our next opportunities are really around continuing to integrate PBIS and attendance. We really need an integrated TFI for PBIS and attendance, so we're tackling that now, and continue with our teaming models and database decision making. I would say the biggest thing, the biggest need, and I believe most of us in this Zoom room know this work doesn't get done without leadership, and that means in our community, we really, really need citywide leaders to be in this with us. This is a complex contextual challenge, and we can't do it without them. Okay. All right. I think this is Chrissy, or am I still going here? Sorry.
That's all right. You were going to talk a little bit about the data that you shared.
Oh, yeah.
Bringing it back to the data.
Yep, sorry. We did a little switcheroo there. So one of the things that I get really excited about in our world over here is using data to really establish the why and keep people motivated when the work gets hard. And so one of the things that we did was really try to understand how have we been withdrawing students? How much have we been withdrawing students in the last few years? So we pulled involuntary withdrawal data, or we termed it disengaged withdrawal codes, and compiled that information so that we could have a third point at the table at all of our meetings and saying, hey, this is why this work is so important. And up at the beginning of our slides in this Zoom, we did learn, the benefits of keeping students in the system are pretty big. And so that helped with this conversation too. Yes, it keeps our students engaged. It keeps them healthy. It gives them access to social safety nets. It prevents what we learned in our financial analysis is a really big load on our city when we have to do a lot of reactive services that we could have prevented. And also, it is a financial benefit in the end for our school district too, to keep our kiddos and keep them in public schools. So that was just one example of the data that we use to drive some of the why and to stay in the work. Next slide. And then again, we just used our EduClimber data system to really quickly and easily identify who is missing, who is about to go missing, potentially, and we can really easily pull those students. Anyone in our district has the ability, if they have access to EduClimber, which is most of our staff, and we can quickly tag students, build interventions for them, progress monitor those interventions, look at the fidelity of those interventions, if they're actually happening or not. And so that's been really powerful for our teams. Okay.
Wow. Thank you, Angela, Shelby, Erica, Lisa, Becky. Thank you all for your preparation and your commitment to sharing your story and clarifying guidance. We want to make sure that people know that this webinar is being recorded. We will be following up today with the PowerPoint, and it will take us a little bit to get the recording to you, but that should be coming in the next week. We are also collecting all of those questions that you have been asking in the Q&A. A number of them have already been answered, but we will compile all of that and share that back out with you. I wanted to just give an opportunity maybe for the panelist team to take a look, if you haven't yet, in the Q&A, because we still have a little bit of time, and there might be a handful of questions in there that folks would be able to answer if folks want to hang out for a little bit. And if folks need to go, just know we're going to continue recording. I would also invite either Lisa or Becky, if you answered a common question that you saw, if you want to take a second to share that right now.
Let me unmute. It was one of the questions I got was about open doors and how the 20 consecutive school days apply to open doors programs. And the answer would be the same with ALE programs too. With those types of programs, they don't, since the instruction is not always in person, the 20 school days, well, wait, on open doors, the 20 school days does not apply to open doors. With open doors, they have to have the 2 hours of contact in the prior month. So that could have occurred earlier in the month and 20 days had gone by, and that student could qualify to be claimed on the open doors programs P223, 14, 18. So with ALE though, there is the expectation that the contact be done within 20 days. So that's what I have to add. Also, another question that often comes in, with the in order to claim students for state funding, they have to physically live in the state of Washington. So oftentimes you can't use the 20 consecutive day exception for students that you know have left the district or left the state and are traveling, or if you know that they are, then they don't meet the definition of a resident of the state of Washington, and for that reason may not be able to be claimed for funding. And again, that's physically living in the state. They might have a home, but if they're not physically in the state, they can't be claimed for state funding until they return to the state.
Thank you, Becky.
So we did have a question about if a student is moving out of state and the parent or family or guardian has communicated that they're moving out of state, do we keep them enrolled until we receive a records request, or do we withdraw them as an unconfirmed transfer? And this is where you would need to look to district policy or practice. You can withdraw the student with that unconfirmed transfer and continue to follow up with the family to determine where they have landed, then reaching out to that district to confirm enrollment so you can share the student's records, and make sure they have all the information to serve the students in the best way. And then you could update that to a confirmed transfer. If you opt to maintain their enrollment, you can also do that until you receive confirmation of enrollment, whether that's in another district in Washington or out of state. But again, please remember, if you opt to maintain their enrollment, you need to continue submitting them to CEDARS with appropriate absence information. So again, district policy or practice determines which pathway you take, but just make sure either way you document and continue to reach out to the family to try and determine the status of the student.
Hey, Christy, someone asked about MTSS and does it have an impact on attendance? Or is there a correlation? Can I speak to that really quickly?
Please.
Yeah, so we just did a data review with all 23 of our building leadership teams and looked at primarily universal screening and asked the question, are kids growing? So we looked at reading, math, and social emotional behavior data. And in the places where we see high levels of growth, we were able to ask, okay, so what systems and practices do you have in place that's getting that growth? And leaders could clearly articulate a universal system in place in their building. I mean, take attendance. They had a universal staff-wide system that they all agreed to and put in place. And then when students didn't respond to that, they used data to put another level of support in for the students. And then when those students continued to struggle, then they put a third level of support in place. And those students kept accessing the tier 2 and the tier 1 universal. And they could show in their data, there's our growth because we have these systems and practices in place. We use data to make decisions. We have entry and exit criteria for why we show up and support kids at another level. So we have a strong correlation in Yakima, even though we don't have everything all done and figured out and everything's perfect, right? We do have these places where we can see that when you put a multi-tiered system of support in place, kids grow, and you really start to see like 5% of students really do need 3 levels of support. 15-ish% need an additional level of support to cycle through sometimes. And then 80% of our students do respond to a really strong universal core in attendance, academics, and things like that. So I would say yes in Yakima.
And Shelby, thank you for that, because it goes to someone else's question about how folks are really leaning on or expecting community engagement boards to be the thing that solves student attendance. And that is, community engagement boards are really intended to be a tier 3 support. And so when a district or a school can put the systems in place that you're articulating, and I know that Franklin Pierce is also working on as well, the more early intervention, the more tier 1 work that happens in the school building, fewer students ideally will surface to the need of having a community engagement board and that really intensive work. It doesn't make it disappear, and people might be experiencing much higher needs right now, and even focusing on those systems is really challenging when you have a flood of students with such high needs. So it's hard to triage, but yeah, hopefully that's helpful. Would you add anything, Shelby?
I would just add that this work really takes a culture of inquiry, like establishing that and having superintendents and principals and everybody, folks who work in assessment and data and student and family services, to really, whenever we get in the room and we talk about this work, it is okay to not do it perfectly. And it's okay to have, I mean, I just put our withdrawal data up in front of everyone for Yakima School District. And that's really hard, I think, for a lot of people to say, here's kind of our, you know, this is some stuff that like we really need to work on. But because we're putting it out there, we have this trust that we're going to work on this, like we're going to make it better. And we're not going to just have this pretend effort that we're going to work on it and we're going to make our attendance data look amazing and not have the conversation about withdrawing students. So I'm really proud of Yakima for having really honest conversations and being transparent about our data with each other and saying, you know, this is where we're at. Let's just start here and keep getting better, and let's stay curious with each other and be kind in this work and ask for help. So I just had to put that out there.
Christy, would you mind if I chimed in from Yakima with some specifics I've seen in the chat? There were some questions on where we document interventions. Again, we document our interventions under the area called special programs in Skyward. And within special programs is a subcategory called other Washington programs. And if you are on Skyward, that is where you should be documenting information, because that's where it's being extracted from and loaded to OSPI. There was an early on question regarding when a student is long-term suspended, how we handle that. And again, similar to setting up new codes for non-engaged and re-engaged, we have a specific status change code we use for long-term suspension that helps us identify those kids that go out on a long-term suspension. And again, the caveat to that is if they are participating in those services that are being provided, then we record their absence in the software as an other type. It's informational for us, but it's not reported as an absence to the state because they are participating in that educational instruction while they're under that suspension. If they do not participate in the instruction, then we are reporting that as an excused absence to the state. So we have different attendance type codes that we do have somebody in the district also who is monitoring that when they participate and making adjustments to their codes so that it's reporting appropriately to the state. I think there was one other question, but I don't remember, so I'll mute for now and go back through the.
I was just gonna, I think it's the one about attendance recording. It was right below. See if I can find it.
Well, while Angela's looking at
automated unrecorded class attendance, I would love to know more about setting that up.
Excellent. Yeah, that is a fabulous feature. If you are in Skyward, you've probably heard of the unrecorded class attendance, but the automated unrecorded class attendance is another feature that you can set up so that it automatically notifies all people who didn't take attendance, and you can also insert other members. So like, for example, Shelby is not a staff member in the entity, but she was getting the communication. And it does provide some accountability, I will say. So it helps others know that there are eyes watching that. It's called the automated attendance. And if you are in Skyward, you could reach out to your ESD or your ISC and they'd be able to help you set that up.
Okay, and I'd like to try and answer the question we had that speaks to, are the schools the last line of defense, or does OSPI track and reach out to students who are not attending school anywhere? My biggest fear is losing track of kids and the potential physical and mental harm for these students. The tracking and reaching out to students is a local responsibility. OSPI does not have the means to do that. We don't have access to student contact information, family contact information, or emergency contacts. Excuse me. So we have some tools that help people look to see if students are enrolled elsewhere, but that is, you know, when we're talking about the last line of defense, that is a local responsibility. So there was also.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, I love this question. I have an add-on.
You want to add on to that?
No, keep going, then I will.
Oh, no, I was going to move on to another question. So go ahead and answer that one, and then I'll speak to the next question.
I was just going to say, I love that question because it does come up, like whose job is this, right? And so right. When we developed kind of a citywide dialogue about this, and thanks to OSPI, they're helping with regional dialogue and support to talk about attendance. What the research and what we're learning just in the field through action research is, it really is like when we hit that withdraw button, it's a big deal. It means a student is now going, they're still at their house in our community, but now we can track data through our city data that says these students, it is highly likely they will drift into really disruptive life events. Like we know that for a fact. And in fact, we've partnered with our Handle with Care program through our Yakima Police Department. And we have shared data to say, here's the kids that are beginning to disengage, and now they've disengaged, and now there's this overlap that starts to happen, and it's multi-generational and all these things, right? We can track gang interaction, teen pregnancy, mental health, things like that. So we know that if we make that decision, it has a huge impact. And having done that financial analysis, we know the financial impact for our city too.
Great, thank you. That's really wonderful additional information. I appreciate that. So we had a question: when a student attends an outside program for mental health, and I'm going to paraphrase, and is gone for 30 or 60 days, how do we keep them enrolled? What are the guidelines for students with this type of circumstance? For reporting to the state, for CEDAR's reporting, you know where the student is at. It's an excused absence. You would maintain their enrollment and just submit excused absences during that time period. And Becky can speak to the fiscal piece of that if she would like to. The only, however, I would state is there are certain schools that partner with districts in Washington that provide the full picture for those students, that actually have public schools within those facilities. If the student is enrolled in one of those mental, physical health facilities and are enrolled in a high school in that district, you would withdraw the student as a confirmed transfer during that time period. And when the student came back, you would re-enroll them, because we want to be careful about that dual enrollment. But that's kind of a very small number. If you ever had questions about that, please feel free to reach out to the Student Information Office.
And for fiscally, for P223 reporting, if you know the student is not living in the state, you can't claim them on the P223. The only exception to that is the approved non-public agencies, the OSPI approved public agents, non-public agencies. For those entities, a student who is there can be claimed for on the P223 and the P223H.
Right, and to mirror what Becky is saying, and thank you for bringing that up, students that are who are being enrolled and served in a contracted non-public agency, like any other contracted services, those are your students. We expect to see them enrolled and submitted to CEDARS in one of the schools in your district, primarily the resident school, or if you've got a school specific for these students.
Chrissy, I did want to chime in on one last question. I've seen a couple in the chat that this was the other one, and that is, if we when we do a status change in the software, do we keep the students in their current class or move them to a different class? And what I will say is we've done it both ways. And again, that goes back to, we're still learning and growing. In the beginning, kids were kept on their regular class. That does, again, that one of those potential impacts are, overload pay. So in some scenarios, students were then moved into a non-credit bearing course where counselors would monitor those students. So, I'm not sure, again, what's the perfect answer, and Shelby will hopefully have more conversations around that, because I do think we should be consistent from a district. And so I just wanted to address those questions that came up in the chat as well.
Well, there are certainly more questions to answer, but I think this is a good time for us to wrap up and say goodbye. Thanks for everyone who stuck with us to the end. And again, thank you so much for everyone here to share this information, to be innovative, and to really lead with the needs of students and families at the center. It's so complex, and it's a big challenge to figure out how to do this right. So appreciate you all. Appreciate folks that have attended today, and we will be following up with resources again, including the PowerPoint and the recording. So thanks again, everyone. Have a wonderful day. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Chrissy. I think there was a last request if someone could repost the PowerPoint in the chat one more time.
We'll do that one more time. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you for all this great conversation. It is truly inspiring to hear what other districts are doing, how it's being done. I've learned a lot from Erica's presentation today too. Thank you very much. It's been great opportunity.
Thank you all for participating. Chrissy, will we send out a communication with the link to the YouTube recording? That was just a question.
Yes, we will be sending out the PowerPoint and the recording. I promise people will get it. Promise,
Yeah.
promise. As my 7-year-old says, promise, promise. Yep.
Promise.
All right.
I love it.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.